The rain fell in sheets, obscuring everything in sight. It was one of those nights when the world seemed to slow down, drowned out by the heavy, steady drizzle. Jack Thompson, a 32-year-old single father, sat behind the wheel of his old truck, his thoughts on his daughter, Emma, and the fever that had been gnawing at her for days. The streets of the quiet suburban neighborhood he called home were nearly empty, the usual noise of city life drowned by the relentless storm. As he pulled into the parking lot of a nearby convenience store, he noticed the figure first, a woman, drenched and staggering, clearly in distress, and then he saw them. 5 men, big and rough, closing in on her like wolves circling their prey. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't one to get involved in things that didn't concern him, but something about the way they moved predatory, without hesitation, struck a chord deep inside him. He knew then that tonight would be different. This wasn't just a casual stop for supplies. He didn't think. He just acted. Jack had never been a fighter. He wasn't the type to look for trouble. But tonight, trouble found him. He had been minding his own business, thinking of nothing but Emma, when he saw her, the woman in distress. Rachel Miller. He didn't know her name yet, but he would soon. She was stumbling, her face pale from the cold rain, and what looked like exhaustion, her feet slipping on the slick pavement. The 5 men were closing in, their voices rising in a chorus of insults and threats. Rachel tried to back away, but they kept advancing. Jack's eyes narrowed. He was about to turn and walk back to the truck, thinking that maybe, just maybe, the store clerk could call for help, but the realization hit him like a punch to the gut. There was no one else. No one else would risk stepping in. His hand tightened on the door handle, and before he even registered his thoughts, he was already halfway across the parking lot. He had no plan, no strategy. He was just going on instinct. "Hey!" Jack shouted, his voice louder than he'd intended. "Leave her alone." The men paused, turning to face him. The leader, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a sneer on his face, sized him up. "And what do you want, tough guy?" he asked. His voice thick with mockery. Jack's heart raced. "Just leave her out of it," he repeated, his voice steadier than he felt. His mind was racing, trying to think of a way to defuse the situation. The leader scoffed. "And what? You think you can stop us? Get out of here, before we make you regret it." There was a brief pause. Jack didn't back down. In fact, his body seemed to move before he could stop it. Stepping forward, adrenaline pushing him past any rational thought. One of the men lunged, reaching for Jack's collar. But Jack was faster. He swung, a punch landing square on the man's jaw. The force sent him stumbling back, shocked by the unexpected resistance. The other men hesitated for a second, and that was all Jack needed. "Run," he shouted at Rachel, hoping she'd take the chance. But she seemed frozen, unsure whether to run or stay. The momentary distraction was enough for one of the men to recover and rush him. Jack barely dodged the incoming blow, but it sent him reeling into the side of a car. Pain shot up his spine, but he didn't let it slow him down. Rachel finally seemed to snap out of her trance, taking a few steps back. "Please, just leave him alone," she screamed, her voice raw with fear. But her words did little to deter the men. The leader moved forward with a knife in hand, grinning as he approached. "You've got guts, but you're not going to get away with this." Jack could feel his muscles burning, his breath ragged in his chest, but there was no turning back now. The sound of the rain pounding against the pavement drowned out the world, leaving only the fight in front of him. The man with the knife lunged, slashing it through the air toward Jack's side. With a burst of instinct, Jack sidestepped, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it, sending the knife clattering to the ground. A roar of frustration erupted from the leader, and the others joined in, rushing toward Jack from all angles. The fight turned into a chaotic blur of fists, feet, and desperation. Jack fought with everything he had, every punch thrown with the memory of Emma's face, every kick powered by the fear of losing his daughter. One man managed to land a punch, sending Jack to his knees. But even as blood began to trickle down his cheek, he didn't stop. He refused to stop. He couldn't. And then, finally, as if by some miracle, The sound of sirens filled the air. The group of attackers paused, confusion crossing their faces. Rachel, her eyes wide in disbelief, shouted, "They're coming! The police!" The men hesitated, their eyes flickering between Jack and the approaching lights. One by one, they turned and fled into the night, leaving Jack, battered and bruised, standing in the pouring rain. Jack collapsed to the pavement, his heart still racing. He was alive. They were both alive. But for how long? He looked over at Rachel, who was kneeling beside him, concern etched on her face. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jack nodded, but he wasn't sure he believed it himself. His body ached, his head spun, but they were alive. For now, that was enough. "Who were they?" Jack asked, his voice hoarse. Rachel took a deep breath, looking over her shoulder at the fading sirens. I don't know. But they're not going to stop. You don't know who you've just crossed paths with." Jack. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the streets glistening with wet reflections of a clear sky. But for Jack, the calm outside did nothing to settle the turmoil inside. He had just finished breakfast with Emma when a sound from above caught his attention. A helicopter. It hovered above his house, a black dot against the blue sky, its rotor blades slicing the air with a mechanical hum. Jack stepped outside, his heart pounding in his chest. What the hell was going on? It was no coincidence. He had just made an enemy far more dangerous than he could have imagined. And now, his world was about to change forever. Jack stood frozen, staring up at the helicopter that hovered above his house. It wasn't just any helicopter. It was sleek, black, and had an air of authority about it. It wasn't an emergency vehicle, nor was it something he'd seen before. The rotors sliced through the air, sending gusts of wind across the yard. Emma, wide-eyed and confused, peeked through the window from inside the house. "Daddy, what is that?" she asked, her voice small, trembling slightly. With the fear she could sense from him, Jack didn't know how to answer. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of the situation. Rachel's warning echoed in his mind. You don't know who you've just crossed paths with. He could hear the faint hum of the helicopter's engine growing louder, vibrating through his chest. The machine slowly began to descend, its shadow creeping closer to his front yard. He stood tall, trying to keep his composure, but his heart raced. The helicopter touched down softly on the grass a few feet away, kicking up dust and debris in its wake. The side door slid open with a mechanical hiss, and out stepped a man in a dark suit. He was tall, well-dressed, with sharp features and an air of command that Jack could feel even from a distance. Jack's instincts kicked in. His muscles tensed. He was no stranger to trouble. But this was different. The man didn't waste time. He stepped forward, his eyes locking with Jack's. There was no greeting, no introduction. Just the immediate weight of the man's presence. "I'm sure you're wondering why I'm here," the man said, his voice calm but authoritative. "My name is Maxwell Crane. I work for a private security firm. A very powerful one." Jack narrowed his eyes. "What do you want with me?" His voice was cold, guarded. He wasn't going to let this man intimidate him. Crane glanced over at the house, his gaze softening for just a second as he saw Emma standing at the window. "I think it's safe to say that your life just became a lot more complicated," he said with a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. Jack's fists clenched. "What does that mean?" "It means," Crane said, stepping closer, "that, last night, you saved the wrong person. And now, the consequences of your actions are about to unfold." Jack's pulse quickened. "Rachel?" Crane's smile faded. "Yes. She's more than just an innocent bystander. She's the daughter of someone you'd rather not be on the bad side of. The men you fought last night were working for him." Jack took a step back, his mind reeling. "Who the hell are you talking about?" His voice was shaking now. He had no idea what he had just gotten himself into. "Her father is Victor Drake," Crane said, as if the name was supposed to mean something to him. The name hit Jack like a ton of bricks. He'd never heard of Victor Drake. But the gravity of the situation was becoming clearer by the second. The way Crane said the name told Jack everything he needed to know. Drake was a powerful man. A man who didn't let anything or anyone stand in his way. Jack opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say anything, a voice called out from behind him. "Jack!" Rachel's voice was urgent, filled with fear. She ran up to him, her clothes still wet from the rain. "Get inside. Now." Jack turned to face her, his eyes wide. "What the hell is going on, Rachel? Who is this guy? Please, just come inside," she urged, grabbing his arm and tugging him toward the door. "We don't have time. We're not safe out here." Jack followed her reluctantly, glancing back at Crane, who stood still, watching them closely. The helicopter's engine hummed softly in the background, and the weight of the situation settled in. Inside, Rachel slammed the door shut behind them and turned to face Jack, her expression frantic. "They're coming for us," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Drake won't stop. He has people everywhere. And now that you've helped me, you're a target too." Jack felt his stomach churn. "What do you mean, helped you? All I did was try to stop those men last night. I didn't know who you were or who they were. What the hell is going on?" Rachel took a deep breath and looked him square in the eye. "Victor Drake is the head of one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the world. He controls everything: drugs, arms, human trafficking, you name it. And I've been trying to escape him for years. When I ran last night, he sent his men after me. But I couldn't just leave. They'll never stop looking for me. And now that you've helped me, they'll come after you too. They'll come after your daughter." Jack's world spun. His instincts screamed at him to protect Emma, to get them out of here. But he had no idea where to go, how to hide, or even who to trust anymore. He had been thrust into something far beyond his control. "We need to leave. We need to go now," Jack said, his voice low and urgent. Rachel's eyes widened. "It's not that simple. Drake has eyes everywhere. If we try to run, they'll find us. The only way to survive this is to confront him." Jack shook his head. "I'm not going after some criminal kingpin. I'm not a soldier, Rachel. I'm just a dad trying to protect my daughter." "But you already are," she said softly, her voice breaking. "You already are." Scene 6. The decision. The next few hours passed in a blur of planning, desperation, and uncertainty. Rachel explained the only way they could escape Drake's reach was to get to his private estate, a heavily guarded fortress where he conducted most of his illegal activities. But getting there wouldn't be easy. It would mean risking everything. "I'll go with you," Jack said, making up his mind. He couldn't let Rachel face this alone, and he couldn't leave his daughter's safety to chance. Rachel hesitated for a moment before nodding. "It's the only way. But once we're in, there's no turning back." Jack looked over at Emma, who was sitting quietly in the corner, her eyes wide with confusion. He knew that whatever they did next would change everything. But he couldn't just walk away. He had to fight for her, for all of them. As the evening drew to a close, they began to make their preparations. The helicopter remained outside, an ever-present reminder of the danger that loomed over them. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was far from over. As the helicopter's rotors began to spin again, Jack felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. There was no going back. He was about to step into a world of shadows, where loyalty meant nothing and survival was the only law. But for Emma, for Rachel, and for himself, he would fight. He had to, and he wouldn't stop until this nightmare was over. The helicopter's engines roared to life again, and the blades cut through the air, sending gusts of wind that tugged at their clothes. Jack felt a strange mix of fear and adrenaline surge through his veins as he climbed inside, Rachel following closely behind him. The doors closed with a solid click, sealing them in the confined hum of the rotor blades. Jack glanced out the window. His house, his life, everything he had known up until that moment, was shrinking beneath them. The helicopter rose higher, taking them further from the life he had known, heading toward the unknown. His mind raced as the landscape beneath them blurred. Drake. The name echoed in his head. He had no idea what kind of power this man wielded, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to stop until Jack and Rachel were dead. "Where exactly are we going?" Jack asked, trying to sound calm but failing. "We're heading to Drake's estate," Rachel said, her voice low. "It's in the middle of nowhere. A place built to keep people in and everyone else out." Jack nodded, trying to process the gravity of what they were about to do. But even as they soared through the sky, Jack couldn't shake the feeling of something looming ahead. The journey had only just begun, and already, the stakes were higher than he could have imagined. Rachel turned to him, her expression hardened, but her eyes still carried a flicker of vulnerability. "You're doing the right thing, Jack. I promise you. We'll make it out of this. We have to." Jack gave a half nod, uncertain whether her words were enough to silence the fear in his chest. He glanced out the window again, watching the landscape become more desolate with every passing second. But deep down, Jack knew there was no turning back. Scene 9. The estate. Hours later, the helicopter descended, its shadow falling on a sprawling, isolated estate hidden deep in a dense forest. The mansion loomed in the distance, surrounded by high stone walls and armed guards. The massive compound seemed to be designed with one purpose in mind: to keep everyone out. Jack's heart hammered in his chest as the helicopter touched down on a large open landing pad just outside the estate's walls. The blades slowly slowed, and the noise died down to a hum. The moment the doors opened, a cold breeze swept through the helicopter, and Jack could feel the temperature drop. There was an eerie stillness in the air. Rachel didn't waste a second. She was already on her feet, moving toward the door. Jack followed, glancing back only once at the helicopter, the last link to the outside world. As soon as they stepped off the pad, a tall man in a black suit approached them. His cold, calculating eyes scanned Jack before shifting to Rachel. "Miss Miller," the man said in a low voice, his tone respectful but stern. "Mr. Drake is expecting you." Jack felt the tension in the air. Every muscle in his body was on alert. They were walking straight into the lion's den, and there was no telling what would happen once they crossed that threshold. Rachel walked ahead, but Jack hung back, his gaze following the man as they led them toward the mansion. The estate loomed ominously, its dark stone walls blending into the night sky. This wasn't just a house, it was a fortress, built for protection, and most likely, for hiding secrets. The man led them through the front door into a massive foyer, where several other armed guards stood at attention, their eyes immediately locking onto Jack. He was out of his depth. He had never seen this kind of power up close. They were ushered into a dark, expansive hallway. The cold, polished floors echoed beneath their footsteps as they walked, Rachel's heels clicking sharply on the marble. At the end of the hallway, two large double doors opened slowly, revealing a dimly lit room. Victor Drake sat at the far end of the room behind an enormous desk. He was impeccably dressed in a dark suit, his salt and pepper hair slicked back, and his eyes sharp and calculating. There was an aura of control about him that was almost tangible. As soon as he noticed Rachel, his lips curled into a smile. "Rachel," he said softly, his voice smooth, like velvet. "I see you've brought a guest. How thoughtful." Rachel stood motionless at the door, her posture rigid. "I came to end this, Drake. It's over." Drake chuckled, his eyes glinting with amusement. "Over? My dear, we both know that it's never over. Not until I say it. Island." Jack felt a chill run down his spine as Drake's gaze shifted to him. And this must be the brave man who decided to play hero last night. Drake continued. "Tell me, Jack, what exactly made you think you could stand up to me?" Jack took a step forward, his fists clenched. He didn't have the answers. But one thing was certain. He wasn't backing down now. "I didn't know who you were," Jack said, his voice steady despite the tension. "I only knew that she needed help. And I'm not walking away from this." Drake studied him for a moment, then leaned back in his chair, a slow, calculating smile spreading across his face. "You know," he said, "I respect your bravery, but I can't let you walk away from this unscathed. You've crossed a line, Jack, and now you'll pay the price." Before Jack could react, the doors behind him slammed shut, and several armed guards moved toward him. His heart raced, but he held his ground. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. Rachel took a deep breath, her eyes now filled with resolve. "Jack, get ready. This isn't going to be easy." Drake's laughter filled the room. "You think you can fight me? You think you can fight all of us?" he said, waving his hand toward the guards who were closing in. "You've underestimated how deep this runs." But Jack wasn't about to back down. He may have been out of his element, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't just fighting for his life anymore. He was fighting for Rachel, for Emma, and for everything that still mattered. As the guards stepped closer, Jack's instincts kicked in. His fists tightened, ready for whatever came next. Rachel moved to his side, and together, they prepared for the battle ahead. It was time to take down Drake, once and for all. The room was heavy with the smell of leather and power, the air thick with tension. Drake's guards flanked Jack and Rachel, their eyes scanning for weakness, their fingers twitching near their weapons. Jack could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him like a vice. The guards, while intimidating, were just pawns. The real danger, he knew, was Drake, the man who had orchestrated everything from the shadows. Rachel stood next to him, her jaw clenched. "We're not leaving here without a fight," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hushed murmurs of the guards. Her eyes locked onto Drake, the man who had made her life hell. There was no fear in her gaze now, only cold determination. Drake leaned forward in his chair, his fingers lightly tapping the surface of the desk, his gaze never leaving Jack. "You really don't know who you're dealing with, do you?" His voice was silky, a sharp contrast to the menace that lay beneath it. "This isn't just about me. It's about an empire, Jack. A legacy that stretches across countries, through governments, through every inch of power you can imagine. And you think you can just walk in here and challenge me?" Jack's heart pounded in his chest. "I'm not here to challenge you, Drake," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling around him. "I'm here to end this for good." Drake's eyes flickered with amusement, then narrowed, his smile faltering. "You're a fool. You have no idea what you're up against." Before Jack could respond, a loud bang echoed through the room, a sound so sudden and sharp it sent a jolt of fear through him. Rachel jumped beside him, her eyes wide, but Jack didn't flinch. He knew that shot wasn't meant for him. It was a warning. "Get them," Drake ordered coldly, his voice clipped. At his command, the guards lunged forward in unison, their weapons drawn. Jack's instincts kicked in, and without thinking, he reached for a nearby chair, swinging it around with all his strength to block the first guard's advance. The chair cracked across the guard's chest, sending him stumbling back. Rachel moved with precision, kicking one guard's gun out of his hand and elbowing another in the ribs, knocking him to the ground. She was fierce trained even. Jack was impressed, but there were too many of them. As the room erupted into chaos, Jack felt a sharp pain in his side. One of the guards had managed to get too close. His knife scraped against Jack's ribs, leaving a trail of burning pain. He gritted his teeth, refusing to fall. Rachel's voice rang out as she swung a lamp at a guard's head, sending him to the ground with a loud thud. "We need to move," Jack yelled, his breath coming in sharp gasps as he fought off another attacker. He could feel the blood dripping from his side, but he didn't stop. "Not now." Rachel nodded, her eyes scanning the room. "This way." She grabbed his arm and pulled him toward a side door, away from the fray. But just as they reached the door, Drake's voice rang out, calm and chilling. "You think you can run, Rachel? You're already too far in. You're mine now. All of you are. You came. You came.com. You came.com. And com. You came.com. Rachel didn't flinch. "We're not your property anymore, Drake." she spat, her voice fierce as she kicked open the door and pulled Jack through. They ran down a narrow corridor, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Jack's side burned, but he ignored it. They had no time to think, only to survive. The sound of heavy boots followed them, and Jack knew that Drake's men weren't far behind. The hallway opened up into a large, dimly lit room. There was no exit in sight, just walls lined with expensive art and leather furniture. But Jack's focus wasn't on the luxury. It was on the shadows creeping toward them, the sounds of footsteps growing louder. "We need a way out." "Now," Jack muttered, his pulse racing. Rachel's eyes scanned the room, and her lips pressed into a tight line. Then, she spotted something, a door at the far end, barely visible in the darkness. Without hesitation, she tugged at Jack's arm, pulling him toward it. The door was locked. Rachel didn't hesitate. She kicked it hard with her booted foot, and the wood splintered under the impact. The door cracked open enough for them to slip through. Beyond the door was another hallway, this one lit with dim overhead lights. It felt colder here, the stone walls of the estate pressing in on them. "We're almost there," Rachel said, glancing over her shoulder to make sure they weren't being followed. "We just need to make it to the back exit." But as they rounded the corner, they came face to face with a new threat. A group of heavily armed men stood blocking their path, their eyes cold and unwavering. There was no way around them. Rachel stepped in front of Jack, her body rigid with determination. "Move aside," she commanded, her voice steady. The men didn't budge. One of them sneered. "You think you can talk your way out of this?" Jack wasn't about to wait around to find out. He shoved past Rachel, his hands flying into action. He grabbed the nearest man by the collar and slammed him against the wall. The others moved in quickly, but Jack was ready. He kicked one in the chest, sending him flying backward. "Rachel, go," Jack shouted. She hesitated for a second, looking back at him with fear in her eyes. But she knew the drill. She turned and ran, her footsteps echoing in the hall. Jack was right behind her, but the sound of more footsteps approaching made him realize just how close they were to being cornered. He couldn't let that happen. They reached the back exit, a steel door that led outside into a courtyard, but it was locked. "No time," Jack growled, yanking at the door. His strength was fading, but he couldn't afford to give up. With one final heave, the door burst open, and they were outside. The air was crisp, the moonlight cutting through the darkness. But the courtyard was surrounded by walls, and they had nowhere to hide. That's when the sound of another helicopter pierced the night air. "Move!" Jack shouted, grabbing Rachel's hand and pulling her toward a nearby gate. They reached the gate, and Jack pulled it open just as the helicopter's spotlight shone down on them. They were seconds away from being caught. But then, a figure stepped out from the shadows, holding a gun. It wasn't Drake's men. "Get down!" the figure barked. Jack and Rachel didn't hesitate. They ducked behind the gate as the figure opened fire on the guards pursuing them, sending them scrambling for cover. The figure ran toward them. It was Maxwell Crane. "You're not safe yet," Crane said, his face grim. "But I can get you out of here." "But we need to move now." Maxwell Crane was their only hope now. Jack knew they couldn't trust him entirely. But for the moment, he was the only ally they had. With the sound of the helicopter and the guards closing in, Jack, Rachel, and Crane sprinted into the darkness, knowing that the fight wasn't over yet. Drake wasn't going to let them escape that easily. But Jack was done running. And if Drake wanted a war, Jack would give him one. The night air was sharp, the cold biting at their skin as they sprinted through the maze of trees and fences. Jack's breath was ragged, his side burning with every step. But he didn't dare slow down. Not now. Crane led the way, his steps calculated and steady. He was familiar with this place, no doubt, and that made Jack feel a sliver of hope. For the first time since this nightmare began, there was someone who knew the escape routes. Someone who could help them. The sound of helicopters was growing louder, and Jack knew they didn't have much time before Drake's men found them. He glanced over at Rachel, her face pale but determined, her eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of movement. She was the only reason he was still running. She had been running from Drake for years, and now her past had caught up with them both. "Keep moving!" Crane shouted, looking back at them. His face was grim, his eyes focused on the path ahead. "There's a safe house just ahead. We'll make it there, but we need to hurry." Jack's mind raced. Safe house. He had no idea who Crane was really working for. But right now, he had to trust him. There was no other choice. After what felt like an eternity, they finally reached a small, secluded cabin hidden deep in the woods. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Crane slammed the door shut behind them and bolted it, the sound of it echoing through the otherwise quiet cabin. Jack collapsed into a chair, his hands trembling from the adrenaline and pain. He had never been in a situation like this before. He was just a man trying to protect his daughter. And now he was deep in a war he didn't understand. Rachel paced the room, her eyes darting toward the windows. "We don't have much time. They'll be here soon. Drake doesn't give up easily." Jack took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. "Then we make sure we're ready for them. We don't run anymore. We fight." Crane, who had been standing by the door, turned toward Jack. "You're right," he said, "but you need to understand something. This isn't just about Drake. He has more power than you can imagine. If we're going to make it out alive, we need to hit him where it hurts." Rachel stopped pacing and turned to Crane. "What do you mean?" Crane walked over to the table and spread out a map, the lines of the estate clearly marked on it. "Drake has a network of people. He has informants, officials, people inside law enforcement. But there's one thing he doesn't have control over: his money. If we can take his financial power, we can cripple him. We strike his business, and we take everything he's built. Then, we have leverage." Jack studied the map, trying to make sense of it. "You want us to go after his money?" "Exactly," Crane replied. "I have access to his offshore accounts. I can pull the strings and make sure his empire comes crashing down. But we have to move quickly. The longer we wait, the stronger his hold on everything becomes." Rachel stepped forward, her eyes burning with determination. "How do we do it?" For the next few hours, Crane laid out the plan. It was risky, to say the least. But it was their best shot at taking Drake down. They would infiltrate one of Drake's key properties, a luxurious mansion used to launder money and host meetings with corrupt officials. Inside, there was a secure vault where all of Drake's illegal funds were stored. Crane had the codes to access it. But they needed to get past the security-armed guards, surveillance cameras, the works. "We don't have much time," Crane said, pulling out a small device from his pocket. "I've already disabled some of the security systems remotely, but it's still a high-risk job. If we fail, we won't get another chance." Rachel was already putting on her gear, her face set with grim resolve. Jack followed suit, his mind racing through the plan. He wasn't used to this life, the life of constant danger, of running, of fighting for survival. But he couldn't walk away now. Not with everything on the line. Crane handed Jack a gun. It was cold in his hands, but it felt familiar. He had trained in the past, and now it seemed like those lessons might be the only thing standing between him and death. "Stay close to me," Crane instructed. "And remember, this isn't about taking Drake down in one fight. It's about stripping him of his power." With the plan set, they set off toward Drake's mansion. As they approached the property under the cover of darkness, Jack felt a knot form in his stomach. This was it. The moment of truth. The mansion loomed ahead, its lights flickering like the eyes of a beast watching them. They slipped through the outer gates, using the cover of darkness to stay hidden. Crane had already hacked into the security system, allowing them to bypass the first set of guards. Jack's pulse quickened as they moved closer to the entrance. His mind raced through every possible outcome, but there was no turning back now. They had a job to do. "Stay low," Crane whispered, leading the way. "We need to get inside before they notice we're here." They reached the main door, and Crane quickly disabled the lock. The door creaked open, and they slipped inside. The mansion was dark and silent, but Jack could feel the weight of the danger pressing in on them. They moved quickly, slipping past guards, avoiding cameras, and staying in the shadows. It wasn't long before they reached the vault, located deep in the mansion's basement. Crane quickly set to work on the security panel, his fingers moving with practiced ease. As he worked, Jack and Rachel stood watch, their eyes scanning the dark hallway for any signs of movement. Jack could hear the faint sound of footsteps approaching, and his heart rate spiked. They had to move and fast. "Almost there," Crane said, his voice calm despite the mounting tension. Just a few more seconds. With a soft click, the door to the vault opened. Jack's heart skipped a beat. Inside the vault were millions, no, billions in cash, documents, and other illicit assets. This was Drake's empire, all laid bare in front of them. But Jack knew they couldn't waste time admiring their prize. "Let's grab what we need and get out," Jack said, his voice steady. But just as they were about to take the documents, the sound of gunshots echoed through the hall. "Ambush!" Crane shouted, shoving the documents into a bag. "Get ready!" The guards had found them. The sound of heavy boots thundered down the hallway, and Jack felt his stomach drop. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they weren't backing down. Jack grabbed the bag with the documents and handed it to Rachel. "Go!" he shouted. Rachel ran for the exit, but Jack stayed behind, his back to the door. He wasn't about to let them get away with everything. He fired the first shot, taking down the first guard that appeared in the doorway. The others followed, their guns raised. Jack fired again, hitting another guard in the chest. "Move, Jack," Rachel shouted, her voice echoing from the hall. But Jack wasn't ready to leave just yet. He had one last thing to do. With a roar of defiance, he charged toward the remaining guards, taking them down one by one. It was chaos, a blur of gunfire and adrenaline. Jack didn't know how long he fought, but every minute felt like an eternity. Finally, when the last guard fell, Jack turned to Rachel, breathless and bloodied. "We're done," he said, his voice strained. "Let's go." Together, they ran out of the mansion and into the night, the weight of Drake's empire now in their hands. As they reached the getaway vehicle, the helicopter whirred to life once again, and Jack felt a strange sense of finality settle over him. He had fought for his life, for Rachel, and for Emma. But this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about making sure Drake would never hurt anyone again. As the helicopter lifted off, Jack looked down at the mansion disappearing below them, knowing that their lives had just changed forever. But he was ready for whatever came next. And this time, they wouldn't be running anymore.